My future mother-in-law stole my $9,500 wedding dress and left a clown costume with no your place, so I walked down the aisle and opened my file. Can you imagine waking up the day before your wedding, finding your dream dress stolen, and in its place, a cheap clown costume with a note that just said, "Know your place"? Because that's exactly what happened to me. But what my future mother-in-law didn't know was that I already knew my place, and I was about to destroy her entire family in front of 200 guests. It was 9:17 p.m., the night before my wedding. Black ink, neat cursive, 3 words, "Know your place." My dress was gone, not misplaced, not tucked away. Gone. The garment bag hung open on the closet door in the bridal suite, completely empty. The zipper was pulled all the way down, like a gaping, mocking mouth. And on the exact same padded hanger, where $9,500 of hand-beaded ivory silk had been, hung the clown costume. Obnoxious red and white stripes, oversized plastic buttons, a stiff ruffled collar, and a dented foam nose tucked into the breast pocket, like someone had squeezed it to see if it honked. My name's Clara Vance. I'm 32, and I work as a forensic auditor for a risk advisory firm in Chicago. My job? It's basically to notice when numbers don't behave. I catch people who think they're too careful, too rich, too protected to ever get caught. 22 months earlier, I'd gotten engaged to Liam Bancroft. In just a few hours, we were supposed to get married in front of 200 people on a pristine, manicured lawn that cost $14,000 a day to rent. His mother, Margaret Bancroft, she had never liked me. She made that abundantly clear at our engagement dinner. We were with 14 people, and she looked at my navy sheath dress, a perfectly nice dress from a mid-tier department store, exactly what an auditor on an auditor's salary could afford, and said, loud enough for the entire private dining room to hear, "Well, she's certainly ordinary, isn't she?" Liam. He actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, he'd probably argue it was nervous. A please don't make this a thing kind of laugh. But it didn't matter. I heard it, and I never, ever unheard it. So there I stood in that suite, holding the note, staring at that cheap polyester costume that had replaced my wedding dress. And in that moment, 2 things became absolutely crystal clear. The first, Margaret Bancroft had just declared outright war, the night before her son's wedding. The second, she had no idea who she was declaring it against. My maid of honor, Sarah, walked in then, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. We were definitely not going to drink. She froze in the doorway. My dad, bless his heart, was by the window, probably checking the weather for the 100th time. He looked up at the sound of Sarah's glass hitting the carpet, and his whole face just changed. "Call security." My other bridesmaid, Jessica, yelled, already reaching for her phone. "Call Liam! Call somebody!" "No," I said. And I wasn't calm because I'm naturally a calm person. I was calm because I had spent the last 11 months building something Margaret didn't even know existed. Some detached procedural part of my brain. The part that spends its days reading wire transfer logs and offshore account statements. It was already doing the math. 11 months of documentation. 6 weeks with a private forensic accountant. A lawyer who'd reviewed the file twice and told me it would survive the harshest federal scrutiny. A folder I'd carried in a $2 plastic document holder to every single family dinner, every bridal shower, every dress fitting, just waiting for the right room to open it in. Margaret had just handed me that room. My dad crossed the suite, slowly, just like he used to when I was little, and upset about something he couldn't fix with a wrench. He didn't ask what I wanted to do. He knew me better than that. "Tell me what you need," he said quietly. I looked at the costume one last time. At the note. At that dented foam nose, sitting in the pocket like a punchline waiting to be delivered. "Zip me into it," I said. "The costume?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Clara, I'm not letting you. I'm not hiding," I interrupted, my voice dead even. "I am not calling this off. And I am not spending tomorrow morning crying into a hotel pillow because Margaret Bancroft wants a reaction. I am walking down that aisle exactly the way she dressed me, and then I am going to explain to 200 people exactly why." Nobody argued after that. My dad zipped the cheap polyester costume up my back, his hand steady in a way I knew his heart wasn't. I kept to my white bridal heels. I left the foam nose in my clutch instead of putting it on my face. Some lines, even in a clown suit, I intended to hold. The next morning, the string quartet began the processional at exactly 11:15 a.m. 200 guests stood up. My father held out his arm at the top of the stone staircase, and I took it. Red and white stripes caught the morning light pouring through the estate's tall windows, and we started down the aisle together. The sprawling outdoor tent went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then, it didn't. To understand why I'd put on that costume instead of falling apart, you have to understand who I was before I met the Bancrofts, and who Margaret had been doing this kind of thing to for a very long time. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a tiny 2-bedroom house. My father was a plumber who destroyed his knees working triple shifts to keep the lights on. My mother taught 3rd grade until she died of breast cancer when I was 19. My dad raised me alone through college on a blue-collar income, and never once made me feel like it cost him anything. So, when Margaret called me ordinary at that engagement dinner, she thought she was insulting my clothes. She was actually describing the 2 incredibly hard-working people who raised me. She had no idea she'd said something I would carry like a badge of honor. I met Liam 5 years ago. He was charming, attentive, and deeply kind. His family, though? A different story. His late father had founded the Bancroft Family Foundation in the 80s, a massive philanthropic entity. When he died, Margaret took over as board chair. Liam's older brother, Harrison, ran the day-to-day operations with total, uncomplicated trust in his mother. For the first 2 years of our engagement, Margaret subjected me to a relentless campaign of subtle psychological warfare. She forced us into booking that expensive Rosewood Manor by paying the deposit behind our backs. She tried to force me to sign a draconian prenuptial agreement with a 10-year cliff that waived all my rights, which I fought tooth and nail with my own lawyer, Elena. Margaret called my legal defense distasteful. Then came the guest list. Margaret offered to cover $175,000 of the wedding budget, but demanded I cut 25 of my own family members to make room for her country club friends. I told her absolutely not. When I told my father, he didn't get angry. He just went to the bank and handed me a check for $22,000, his life savings from a decade of overtime, and told me nobody was going to buy a say in his daughter's wedding. But the real turning point happened 11 months before the wedding. I got a call at my office from a paralegal named Rachel. She said her firm had a client who wanted to speak with a forensic auditor, off the record, about a prominent Illinois family foundation. 2 weeks later, I sat in a dingy coffee shop in Evanston, across from an older woman named Beatrice Thorne. Beatrice had sat on the board of the Bancroft Family Foundation for 12 years. She slid 2 thick folders across the table. "I've stayed quiet longer than I'm proud of," she said. "I'm not staying quiet anymore." The folders contained bank records, LLC formation documents, and a terrifyingly detailed spreadsheet Beatrice had built late at night. The pattern was ugly. Scholarship money meant for underprivileged kids in Chicago was being routed through shell companies with names like Oakleaf Community Partners. From there, the money vanished into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account that didn't have Margaret's name on it, but carried the maiden name of Margaret's late mother, buried 3 subsidiaries deep. I didn't tell Liam. I didn't have absolute proof yet, just a furious whistleblower's files. I wasn't going to detonate my own engagement on a hunch. I was going to build a bulletproof case. I hired a private forensic accountant named David Chen, using the money I'd saved for a kitchen renovation. David spent 6 weeks tracing every shell company and every stolen dollar. His verdict was brutal: deliberate concealment, consistent pattern, massive fraud. I took it to Elena, my lawyer, who reviewed it and told me, "This will survive federal scrutiny." For months, I carried that explosive file everywhere in that $2 plastic folder. At the rehearsal dinner, Margaret had even picked it up, smiled her venomous smile, and called it a cute little planner. She had no idea she was holding her own prison sentence. The laughter rolled through the 200 folding chairs like a wave breaking against a seawall. First a ripple, then a swell, then a full, cruel, cresting sound that filled the massive white tent. Phones came up in a row, screens catching the afternoon light. In the front row, wearing silver silk, Margaret sat with her hands folded, a serene, triumphant smile on her face. She'd been waiting for this. She'd orchestrated my ultimate humiliation, and now she was watching it play out exactly as she'd imagined. I kept walking. My white heels didn't wobble once. My father's arm stayed rock steady under mine. Liam's face went through 3 distinct colors as I approached the altar. White first, then a blotchy, panicked red, then something closer to gray. He reached out and grabbed my wrist as I stepped up beside him, his grip hard and frantic. Go change, he hissed, his voice low and urgent, his eyes darting to the laughing crowd instead of looking at me. Right now, please. Into what? I said, projecting my voice loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Your mother dressed me like a clown in front of everyone you know. There isn't a spare dress backstage, Liam. There's just this. And an explanation, if anyone is interested in one. Margaret rose from her seat, smoothing her expensive silk skirt. She turned to face the officiant with the easy authority of a woman used to owning the room. Let's proceed, she said, her voice pitched to carry over the murmurs. Before this gets any more embarrassing for everyone, I turned to face her instead. The 200 people went quiet again. It was a different kind of quiet than the laughter had been. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room that suddenly realizes it's about to get something it didn't order. I reached into my bridal clutch and took out the dented orange foam nose. I set it down gently on the altar beside the unity candles, right next to a small crystal vase of white peonies. I let it sit there for a second before I looked up at Margaret. I've been looking forward to this, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant almost anything in my life. Do you remember a board meeting in March 3 years ago? $920,000 moved out of the scholarship endowment through a shell company called Oakleaf Community Partners. It went into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that doesn't have your name on it anywhere. A normal person would think to look. Margaret's smug smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes shattered. I watched it happen in real time, the way you watch a crack travel across a windshield that's just been struck by a rock. Or maybe August of the following year? I continued, my voice ringing out clearly across the tent. 4 million. 3 shell companies this time instead of 1. You got more careful, but you didn't get careful enough. The tent was paralyzed. 200 people were holding a single collective breath. 11 months of documentation, I said, my voice dripping with icy precision. A private forensic accountant who used to work financial crimes for the FBI. An attorney who has reviewed the file twice and told me it is bulletproof. A board member who sat across from me at a coffee shop and handed me the initial ledgers because she couldn't watch you steal from underprivileged kids anymore. Margaret's mouth opened, but absolutely nothing came out. In 4 years of knowing her, I had never once seen her speechless. I opened my clutch again and lifted out the black $2 plastic folder, the same one she'd called a cute little planner. I held it up high so the entire tent could see it. Everything in this folder has already been sent to 3 people, I announced. My attorney, a federal investigator who has had the full file for 6 weeks, and a financial reporter at the Chicago Tribune, who, as of this morning, has confirmation from a second independent source. I let that land. The silence was deafening. You didn't just lose a wedding dress last night, Margaret. You lost the only thing you actually had left to threaten me with. Margaret sat back down. It wasn't graceful. Her legs simply stopped holding her up, and the folding chair just happened to be there to catch her. I looked around the tent at the frozen faces. At Harrison Bancroft, 3 rows back, his hand pressed flat over his mouth in sheer horror. At Liam, who was staring at me like I was a stranger, his chest heaving. I looked last at my father, whose eyes were wet with tears of absolute pride. You wanted me to know my place, I said, speaking directly to Margaret, to the tent, to the 11 months of quiet, patient, excruciating work that had led to this exact spot of grass. So, here it is. I am standing in a cheap clown costume you bought, holding a federal fraud case in my hand, asking the only question left worth asking. I let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. I had earned every single one of them. Which one of us is the joke? Nobody laughed this time. The wedding did not continue. There was no version of reality where it could have. The officiant quietly stepped back, packing up her binder. Guests filtered out of the tent, clustering in whispering groups, their phones still raised. They knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about at every high society dinner party in the state for the next decade. My father walked me back up the aisle. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, Sarah had already found me a change of clothes, jeans and a sweater that belonged to Jessica. I stripped out of that suffocating polyester costume behind a folding screen, and for the first time all day, my hands finally started shaking. Margaret tried to save face. She stood up in her silver silk and raised a hand for quiet the way she had at 100 charity galas. Almost nobody stopped for her. A young caterer's assistant eventually walked over and told her that the venue needed the tent cleared within the hour for another event. It was the first time in Margaret's life that anyone had spoken to her as though her schedule mattered less than someone else's. The consequences moved faster than I expected, and yet slower than I wanted, the way the justice system always does. Elena filed the documentation formally with federal investigators that following Monday. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division opened a massive case within the month, working alongside the Attorney General's office on the state-level tax fraud angle. Within 8 weeks, the Bancroft Family Foundation's accounts were entirely frozen pending investigation. Margaret did not go quietly. First came the Crisis PR firm out of New York, releasing a statement calling my allegations the product of a jilted, jealous outsider attempting to manufacture relevance. Then came the private investigator Margaret hired to dig into my finances, hoping to find a skeleton in my closet. He found absolutely nothing. Then someone from the Crisis firm placed an anonymous complaint with the Compliance Division at my employer, alleging I had used privileged client information to build a personal vendetta. It triggered a 3-day internal review. My managing director called me into his office. I thought I was going to be fired. Instead, he told me that because I had built the case on my own time, with my own money, using outside counsel, I was completely cleared. In fact, my boss laughed out loud, noting that I had used better methodology than most of their actual corporate clients. I got a promotion the following spring. Margaret's downfall truly accelerated when her own family turned on her. Harrison, the older brother who had blindly trusted her for years, pulled the original board minutes himself. He cross-referenced them against the timeline I had exposed. He called Liam at 11 p.m., sobbing uncontrollably. Harrison resigned from the foundation board that week, cooperated fully with federal investigators, and told a reporter on the record that he would rather see the foundation dissolved than keep his mother's name attached to it. Liam was shattered. For the first few weeks, he was a ghost. He kept asking me if there was any way I could have gotten the math wrong. I understood he wasn't questioning my skills. He was a man realizing his entire adult life was funded by stolen money. But once Harrison turned state's evidence, Liam stopped asking if I was wrong. 4 months after the wedding, that wasn't. Liam quit his cushy job at the family's real estate firm. He couldn't stomach sitting in an office built on fraud. He took a job at a mid-sized development firm in Chicago for a third of his previous salary. He moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment. We didn't rush back into anything. We went to dinner 4 times before either of us said the word wedding out loud again. The criminal case took just over a year to resolve. Margaret was indicted on 11 counts, including wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. After months of her expensive attorneys threatening a trial, she finally broke. She took a plea deal that included full restitution of the stolen funds, a suspended sentence contingent on 5 years of strict federal probation, and a permanent lifetime ban from serving on the board of any nonprofit organization. The original $9,500 wedding dress turned up in the spring. Margaret had hidden it in a climate-controlled storage unit rented under a cousin's name. It was completely undamaged, the tag still on. Elena asked if I wanted it shipped to my apartment. I told her to donate it to a nonprofit in Chicago that lends formal wear to underprivileged high school girls for prom. I have never regretted knowing that dress is out there making an 18-year-old feel beautiful, rather than hanging in my closet as a souvenir of Margaret's cruelty. The clown costume, however, I kept. It's folded neatly in a box on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. Every so often, my hand brushes the red and white stripes, and I let myself remember the precise, beautiful sound 200 people make when they stop laughing, all at once. Liam and I got married 15 months after the disaster at Rosewood Manor. It was incredibly small, just 30 people in a friend's backyard. I wore a simple dress I bought off the rack for $200. My father walked me down a much shorter aisle, wearing the exact same tie he had worn the year prior. He cried before I did. Margaret was not invited. People like Margaret Bancroft build their entire lives on the idea that some people are simply meant to take up less space. They test that theory quietly for years through small humiliations. A coat that goes missing, a dress called ordinary, a family pushed off a guest list. They only find out how wrong they are when someone finally stops excusing their behavior and starts documenting it instead. I didn't destroy Margaret's family because I wanted a viral moment. I did it because underprivileged kids needed their scholarship money. Because my father gave me his life savings so no one could buy my dignity. And because a woman decided the night before my wedding that the best way to remind me of my place was to strip away my humanity. She wanted me small. But I have never in my life felt larger than I did standing at that altar, in a foam nose, holding the folder that ended her reign. I knew my place then. I always did. I just needed 200 witnesses to hear me say it out loud. So tell me, have you ever been pushed this far? What would you have done in my place? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below.